Do you believe in God? I think most people do. I think the majority of people in the world do believe in God. But it's an interesting question because is belief based on faith or is it based on an experience, possibly? Well, in my case, I think I always believed in God, but I had a couple of experiences which really made me, I guess, more than believe in God and to know there is a God. Now, again, it's probably just semantics on my part. It probably is still belief. But I always think about years ago when I was in graduate school for counseling psychology, I was studying some clips that were done of Carl Jung, the very famous psychiatrist. And he had given an interview a year or two before he died. And this was actually filmed. And the interviewer, at one point in the interview, asked Carl Jung, he said, "Do you believe in God?" And there was a hesitation, which was very interesting because Carl Jung was the son of a minister and was known for being a very spiritual person. And so when the interviewer asked the question, I guess he thought he would just say, "Well, of course I believe in God." But instead, Carl Jung said something like, "Do I believe? No." He said, "I know. I know there is a God." And that's kind of, I don't know what his specific experiences might have been that led him to have that kind of statement, but I do know that I understand it now. I understand it because I've had a couple of experiences in my life that led me to that. So today I'm going to talk to you about those experiences, which really led me to more than believe. These experiences actually happened close in time, actually, within like 2 or 3 years. And the first one happened in 1977. And I was 23 years old when this happened. Actually, I was 22 years old when this happened. And I was in Africa with the Peace Corps. I had joined the Peace Corps and I was in a little country called Togo in West Africa. And we had been in the country maybe about a month, maybe 6 weeks when this happened to me. But became very ill. At first, they didn't really know what was wrong with me. They thought I had malaria and they treated me for that, but that didn't do anything. And then when I got sick, we were training in the kind of the middle area of the country. And the doctor, we had a dedicated Peace Corps doctor at the time, but he was not there. He was actually down at the Peace Corps office in the capital city. And so when I got sick, they thought, of course, it was malaria because I got a very high fever and all of that. But they quickly began to suspect that I had cholera. And I got very sick very fast and lost all my fluids, which is what happens when you have cholera. And I couldn't keep anything down, not even water. And so that first night that I was really, really sick, and I think I'd been sick already maybe about 24 hours at that point, but everybody, fortunately, I had all the Peace Corps people around and, I was being looked after, but we were, living in these very basic kind of dormitory situations and sleeping on really basic cots. And it was not a good situation to be sick in. And I know that I was conscious the whole time. I would I don't know if you've ever been so sick that you can't actually sleep. It was kind of like that. I really couldn't sleep. I kind of went in and out of kind of a half sleep, but I really wasn't sleeping. And I had this wonderful friend at the time that she held my hand the whole time and talked to me. And they had to keep putting cold compresses on my head because my fever was so high and they couldn't bring it down. And at one point they actually packed me in some ice because my fever was just too high. Well, you might think that I was maybe delirious in that situation, but I don't believe that I was because I don't remember doing anything that, really made me sound, like delirious or whatever. And most of the time I was not talking. At one point during the night, I had a very strong feeling that I might die, and which was not really far-fetched, actually. And I was laying there, and internally, I didn't say this outwardly, but internally, I asked God, I said, am I going to die tonight? And what happened after that was so amazing. Like I said, this has only happened, something like it has only happened twice in my whole life. But right after I asked the question, this strange thing happened. It was like there was a whooshing sound, and then all the sound disappeared. It was very quiet. And when that happened, there was a silence for a moment, like there was no sound. And I remember I actually recognized that it was strange. And then this great booming voice I heard, and it said, no, it's not your time. And that's all that it said. But the minute I heard the voice and the minute I heard the words, I knew that it was telling the truth, whoever it was. I didn't know if it was God. I didn't know if it was an angel. I didn't know if it was like my spiritual guide. I didn't know who it was. I had no clue. But I believed it instantly. Like it was so, it was like the voice permeated my entire body. And so the minute I heard it, I knew I wasn't going to die. And even though I was still very sick, the next day they sent me down by car to the Capitol, and I was tended to by the doctor and his wife, who was a nurse. And it still took me quite a while, at least a week, 10 days to really get back to normal. And I was very, very ill. But I knew the minute I heard that voice that I wasn't going to die. And I believed it. And I'd never heard anything like that. I knew it wasn't me saying that in my head. It was like coming from somewhere else. So that happened about 2 years later, approximately 2 years later, I heard the voice again. And this time the situation was completely different. I was back in the United States. I was living out in Seattle at the time. I had gotten married. I was pregnant. And actually I was just about to give birth to my son. Now, I didn't know I was having a boy at the time. They didn't do ultrasounds routinely back then, so I had no idea whether I was having a boy or girl. But I had a very easy pregnancy, but I had a very complicated labor. And I had already been in labor about 20 hours maybe at this point, maybe over 20 hours. And I mean active labor, not like it stopped and started and that sort of thing. And I ended up having a 30-hour long labor, which was exhausting. But around the 20th hour, maybe slightly after that, I remember being in the hospital room, and I was in trouble, actually, medically. And they were checking, I had an internal fetal monitor on, and they were checking him, and he was doing fine so far, but I was starting to get a fever. I was very weak. I wish they had done in retrospect, I honestly wish they had done a cesarean, but they didn't. And they, made me push my son out, and it took about 2.5 hours. But anyway, before all that happened, I was alone in the room briefly, and my husband, who had been around most of the time, had gone, probably to the restroom or something like that. I don't know. And I was starting to worry, but not about myself in the moment. I was worried about my baby. And I just kind of said, again, inside my head, is the baby going to be okay? And the same thing that had happened 2 years before happened. There was this great whooshing like sound, all the noise was like vacuumed out of the space. And there was silence for a moment or two. And then there was this voice, the same voice I had heard 2 years before. And the voice said, you will never have to worry about him. You will never have to worry about him. And the minute I heard it, I knew it was true. And it didn't occur to me till later to realize that the voice had said him, when I didn't even know I was having a boy at the time. And what's so amazing about that is not only was he fine, and I came through it. I had some issues, but I came through it. And but it occurred to me later, and many years later actually, that my son was exceptionally like protected or something. Like I didn't ever have to worry about him when he was growing up. He was only in one like kind of large like accident where he injured himself, but it wasn't even really that bad. And he hardly ever got sick. He never did things that were, put himself in jeopardy or, I mean, it was amazing. I never really had to worry about him. And it was such a strange message to be given. It was a beautiful message to be given. Probably the best message a mother could ever be given is to say, you will never have to worry about your child. I mean, that's pretty incredible. So, just as the time before, I never doubted the message. I've never forgotten it. I know that voice just after hearing it twice. I know it so well that if I should ever hear it again in my life, I will recognize it immediately. And I've never heard any other voice sound like that. It was very deep, and it was not like an echo or something, but it was resounding. It was a resounding voice. And it was calm, and it was loving. But it was also not overly like, sympathetic or anything, just matter of fact, like this is the truth. So, those two instances are a big reason why I know. I don't really know if that was the voice of God, but I do know that that came from somewhere that probably is where God is. So whether God had an angel say it or a guide or something else, I don't know. I do know. I just know that there is a God. And it's such a comforting thing to know that. I don't need proof at this point. I've had all the proof I need. I probably would have believed in God whether or not those incidents had happened or not. But they did happen. And that knowing of this, the knowing that there is a God, is probably one of the greatest gifts I've ever received. So I wanted to share that with you today. Until next time, take care of yourself and others.